Hello and welcome to Casual Krakoa. I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of comicbookherald.com. You are joining a live edition. We're going to review all of the X-Men comics that came out today. That includes Inferno number 2, Wolverine number 17, Marauders number 25, and Sword number 9. A good big week of X-Men comics here in the Reign of X in this very fun time for X-Men. The big issue, of course, being the event comic. Inferno number 2, written by Jonathan Hickman, art by Stefano Caselli, colors by David Curiel, letters by Joe Sabino. I will have a proper Crack and Krakoa video breaking down Inferno number 2 going live later this evening. But for those of you that are able to join live today, we can talk any and all comics. Get your questions in here in the chat. The super chat is available for those of you who want to get your question prioritized and also want to simultaneously support Comic Book Herald endeavors. Thank you so much to those of you who do. To the rest of you, thank you for joining live or listening later. That's an option too. These are going up now as live streams, which we're doing currently. This will be available via all the X-Men video playlists that you can watch later, or I will also be uploading the audio here to the podcast. If you check out the Comic Book Herald podcast, you can find that via comicbookherald.com. You can Google Comic Book Herald in your podcast player of choice. You will find it there as well. You can hear the conversation a whole bunch of ways, but thank you to everybody that's pouring in here live. Love to see it. Get your questions in the chat if you have them. Otherwise, have a fun conversation while I chat here. Be polite, be respectful. That's all I ask, and we'll have a good time talking X-Men comics. Okay, so again, I'm gonna do a full Inferno number 2 review. I've got a lot to say about it, as you might expect, although maybe not as much as I anticipated, honestly. It's not as big and massive, right, as a second issue as it could have been, or maybe as I hoped. But again, like I said, it's a very, very good week of X-Men comics. My very, very broad reviews: Inferno number 2, good. Sword number 9, great. Marauders number 25, fine. It's like it's chewing gum at this point, right? Marauders, very disposable, but fine. And Wolverine number 17, if you're into Ben Percy's writing and you're into the run that he's been doing across Wolverine and X-Force, you're probably going to continue to enjoy this. If you're not, then you should have checked out a while ago. Nothing has changed. I am enjoying sort of the spy and mystery elements of the Percy run. You know, I think it's not as big picture stuff, but it is grounded, and it's a good fit for a Wolverine comic set in this Krakoa era, right? So I'm enjoying the landscape there, although it's certainly not my favorite series. All right, let's dig in. Let's start, I think, probably with the big one. We'll start with Inferno number 2. I'm not going to talk about it in as much detail as you might expect, because again, I want to save some commentary for the full Crack and Krakoa, which I recommend everybody check out. But again, you're all here live, so let's talk about it. And then I probably want to spend the second most time talking about Sword, because I continue to be delightfully surprised that in back-to-back months now, we had an Inferno issue released, we had a Sword issue released the same day. I had a better time reading Sword both times. I did not anticipate that. I'm a huge Jonathan Hickman fan. I am very invested in what Inferno is doing. I'm not knocking it necessarily, but I continue to be delightfully in love and kind of surprised by what Sword is doing. I just think Al Ewing is absolutely killing it. That book takes me to places and takes me in directions that I do not anticipate to a greater degree than pretty much anything in the Krakoa era right now. And I don't want to see Sword ever end. I'm loving what's going on there. So again, we'll talk about that, amazing run and that amazing issue in a bit more detail, including, the big reveal at the end. So there will be spoilers. Okay, there will be spoilers about what happened in these issues. If you haven't read the comics yet and you don't want to know what happens, I would recommend go read them and then come back to this again. It'll be available once we're done here on the live stream, but we are absolutely going to talk about what happens, okay? So you have been warned. So, all right, let's get into it. I'm going to scan the questions as I go, try to pull in some of the good ones. I saw a really good one up front that actually I'll dig right into first. And this was before we got going. Question was, hey, Dave, so far we've seen the payoff to most characters in the teasers for this event. What is the role Psylocke might play in this? Bishop is making his war college. that'll backfire for sure. Yeah, so the teasers to Inferno were basically like, we can't trust our leaders, we can't trust our friends, we can't trust our enemies, yada yada, right? It's all about everything's falling apart. We can't trust. There's all these secrets, and we know that to be true with Professor X and Magneto and Moira and everything they've been planning. Obviously, Mystique, Destiny, Emma Frost, they all have big plans as well. And then probably the biggest left field turn was Psylocke, Conan, not Betsy Braddock. Okay, right? She's Captain Britain now. We have Bishop and then Colossus were in that teaser. Now, the big reveal at the end of Inferno number 2 today. And again, like I said, spoilers, jumping right to the last page first. The big reveal at the end of Inferno is that Professor X and Magneto, in kind of a desperation play to get somebody on the Quiet Council that they know they can trust, that they know they will have the vote for, because it's become this whole Supreme Court, we need to get the right votes dynamic here, where like there's this power struggle of who controls the council now. They bring in Colossus, okay? And we know, as readers invested in every issue in this X-Men universe, that in the Ben Percy written and often Josh Cassara drawn X-Force, Colossus is compromised, okay? So this seeming ally, this longtime X-Man, he is currently under the influence. We don't know exactly to what degree, but he is currently under the influence of his brother, Mikhail Rasputin, the Chronicler, this individual with seemingly a mutant ability to like write things that then become true, and just in general, like the anti-Krakoa nation state of Russia, right? So last we saw was X-Force number 24, which came out 2 weeks ago now. Last we saw Colossus murdered his girlfriend, also a mutant, on Krakoa, and then was approached by Professor X. That potentially, if this is integrated as directly as it is implied here, that potentially could be Professor X coming to Colossus' little cottage there to be like, hey, we're going to invite you to the council, feel him out, do we have your vote kind of thing. It could be that conversation. If it's not, it's really going to make it stand out how discordant the line has gotten. But it seems like those things should play together, okay? Because, Colossus shows up and there's this panel, the very last panel of the book of issue number 2 is, someone we can trust, and it's clearly played ominously, right? It's clearly, okay, we actually can't trust Colossus. And really what it does is it sells yet again. It's just building in on itself in selling every decision Moira, Professor X, Magneto make throughout Inferno and in much of the build to this point throughout the Dawn and the Reign of X has backfired tremendously. Through all their careful scheming, through all their plotting and planning, they continue to see things fall apart and everything's going to come crashing down on top of them. I mean, I've said this a bunch in the build to this, but Inferno it's the story of Professor X and Magneto falling, right? It is the fall of the mutants, specifically Professor X and Magneto. They are no longer going to be the rulers. They are no longer going to be in charge when all is said and done here. I don't think that is... It's not even really a prediction at this point, because in Inferno number 1, the first thing we see is Emma Frost standing over Professor X and Magneto, who have been resurrected, are down on their knees, and are clearly not the ones driving the ship anymore. Okay, so that's coming, that's happening. I think it basically already happened here, and we see that in Inferno as the progression essentially of, okay, now they don't even control the Quiet Council anymore. And that's most of what this issue is it's Hickman doing his, what I'm going to call in the Crack and Krakoa video, basically now his patented rewind plotting, where he rewinds the video, explains how something we saw previously actually happened, and then basically what in this case is just telling us how Mystique got Destiny resurrected, because that was the big reveal at the end of Inferno number 1. And then it explains basically how Mystique secured the votes. I was having visions, that whole sequence of Kendall Roy in the first season of Succession, trying to secure votes to get his father ousted as CEO of Royco. Pick and choose your variety there, like whatever brings to mind for you. But it's Mystique going to all the players on the Quiet Council and basically being like, what do I need to bribe you with? What do I need to get you in order to secure your vote? What do I need to tell you in order to get you on my side? And she's successful, ultimately. She's successful. Mystique and Destiny now have, some modicum of control over the Quiet Council and the direction of Krakoa moving forward, at least so far as Krakoa continues to function with a Quiet Council and isn't destroyed or drastically upturned or overturned by the threat of Orcus, of Nimrods, and potentially whatever it is Moira's actually planning. I will say, going through half of this event and not engaging with the Destiny Diaries, which we saw teased at the end of X-Men number 20, not engaging with anything Phalanx related, right? Anything super future plot wise. I'm a little surprised we've made it this far and haven't really engaged with a lot of the really big ideas. Inferno is very grounded. It is very grounded in Krakoan politics, in the Krakoan nation state, and I think one of the huge appeals of House and Powers, which obviously is the gold standard that this era will forever be trying to get back to and failing. It will not do it, but forever trying to get back to is one of the the true potential there is like the future, the long-term planning, right? The sci-fi of it all. That's not really here, right? So this is great, I think, if you're super invested in the Krakoan nation state, which is definitely which is definitely where a lot of people are and where the line is at. I'm seeing here in the comments Succession spoilers too. I promise I did not spoil anything Succession related. I just referenced a thing that happened in the first season, which was several years ago. I don't even think I said what the outcome was, all right? So no future Succession spoilers, I promise. Okay, so, but Inferno number 2, again, I'm going to do a full dig on it. The question was, what is the role Psylocke might play in this? Okay, we don't really have a great sense of like, why can't we trust Psylocke specifically with this event? Well, what we know about where Psylocke's at right now is in the first issue, we do see Psylocke nominated to, War Captain status, alongside Magic and where Cyclops has been and Bishop, right? And so we see, okay, Psylocke's going to take a more important role. We know that right now, post-Hellions, what happened with Psylocke in the book Hellions, written by Zeb Wells, which is one of my absolute favorites, definitely recommend. If you're invested in the Hickman of it all, like check out Hellions. It's up there with Sword for me. Psylocke has an extreme vendetta against Mr. Sinister right now, Quiet Council member. Mr. Sinister basically manipulated her, blackmailed her by using the DNA code for her daughter, and then that was recently destroyed. Okay, by Havoc, although that's losing some of the complexity. It's putting it all on Alex Summers' shoulders, which he probably is doing too. But so Psylocke has recently lost her daughter. It's a little more complex than that, and it is very much in part Mr. Sinister's fault. So she's got it out for at least one Quiet Council member. Beyond that, I don't really know exactly where Psylocke's at, or really, frankly, any of the Hellions who are going through a hell of a time right now. Like they're having a difficult time. So what is Psylocke's role going to be? I was viewing it as, okay, she'll definitely side with, let's see some new power dynamics. Let's see new faces on the council, or the dismantling of a council entirely. Like, what about a different ruling structure? I could see Psylocke potentially on the side of that. Does that mean she's a clear ally for Mystique and Destiny? Like, I don't know that this is going to break into Krakoan teams quite to that degree, although I suspect that she would, right? There's no love lost here necessarily with Psylocke and like Professor X, Magneto, and Mr. Sinister, although then you have to consider, okay, but where does Sinister's loyalty lie to himself? And he's not on team Professor X and Magneto either, unless they can give him what he wants. And as they lose power, they're going to increasingly not be able to do that. If she just wants revenge on Sinister, I don't know exactly what that gets us in Inferno. Sinister right now is there's an interesting thing in Inferno number 2, because Mystique's doing her shape-shifting thing and fooling everyone by doing it. She's pretending to be Magneto. She's pretending to be Professor X. She's getting all the pieces in place in order to resurrect Destiny, which she does. And I love that she resurrects Destiny the young style, right? She resurrects Destiny in a younger body, in the younger version from when they first met, which is her gift to her, as she says, instead of putting her in obviously a more debilitated form. At one point, Moira says something to the effect of like, who knows what they could be doing, and it's like they're reunited lovers who haven't seen each other in years, and one of them just came back in a super like fit young body. I think we know what they're doing, Moira. I can guess personally what they might want to be making up for with all that time lost. But the point being, like, Mystique tricks everyone into doing this, but the one person she doesn't really trick is Mr. Sinister. Like, Sinister sees through her pretty much immediately. It's right there in the dialogue. He references it later. He clearly knew it was Mystique asking for Destiny's DNA. Sinister, I don't think he's as cavalier and as casual about like playing along as has been implied, right? So like I don't see Sinister being the type of character who's going to be like, oh sure, Mystique, here's your DNA, and then not do anything with that or not make any plans based on that, right? So I think there's still some Sinister secrets to come. I think there's a lot of potential for, okay, what is Sinister's endgame in all this? What is his scheme in all of this? Because he knows a lot of what's going on here. He knows a lot more than he's letting on to. I think there's a lot to be done there. Psylocke could be the one who sort of prevents that from happening at this point. Although honestly, I'm kind of rooting for Sinister. Like I kind of want to see what it is he's going to do or how he's going to sabotage everything. So I guess in that sense, I'm kind of rooting against Psylocke. So that was a good question. I think in a roundabout way, it led to a lot of coverage of what is going on in the issue and what a lot of the players are doing, just by virtue of all of these interpersonal dynamics and relationships that are at play here. I think that is a big part of what makes Inferno right now, specifically in the Krakoa era, so intriguing. Like I think that's what makes it so fun, where you don't necessarily have to, as much as I would enjoy it, you don't have to get into the sci-fi powers of 10 part of it, because we have all these relationships and all this Krakoan politicking that needs to be discussed, like the Magneto and Professor X relationship, their relationship to Moira to Destiny and Mystique to Emma Frost, right? And it goes on and on and on. All these things, all this history is compounding and building. And, one thing that we look at House and Powers, and it kind of narratively happened a little bit easily that everyone was on the same page. And that was a part of the magic of that event, was how it sold that, right? How it made that believable. You didn't really have to sit and question, oh, would Apocalypse really join with them? Would Mystique really be feeling this? It kind of didn't matter, right? There was kind of this magic, there was this aura, there was this momentum about the whole thing where you didn't have to worry about it. But now, as we move further down the line, and you see the cracks, and you see the secrets, and you see all the pettiness, you're kind of reminded, or I'm kind of reminded here, that a lot of these people don't like each other, and they don't like working together, and they have very different visions for what this island should be, and that's going to manifest in problems for a lot of them, especially, as I've said up front, Professor X and Magneto and Moira, because their plans are the most locked in, right? Their plans are the most inflexible, actually, is probably the best way to say it, because Moira has a vision. She has a vision for what needs to happen, and anything that gets in the way of that, it just keeps them from long-term mutant survival, And that's one of the things that I'm very interested in with Inferno, and obviously have been in this entire era and the whole Hickman vision. But one thing that has, I suppose, surprised me, Moira does not seem as on top of it as I imagined she might. Throughout the Dawn and the Reign, we saw Professor X and Magneto making mistakes and cracks forming, right? And that was a little easier to swallow for me, because they're these two ideologues, these great men who envision themselves as sort of always right and as the right rulers for mutant kind, and they kind of always have. And we see very early in House and Powers, they go to Sinister against Moira's wishes, right? So we've seen them behave, against what Moira, the one who actually has the knowledge, would have recommended. But what we're seeing in Inferno now is Moira doesn't have control of the situation either, or at least that's the implication halfway through the event. Like, Destiny comes back. Like, here's the thing. If Destiny is such a non-starter for Moira, she could have taken action a lot sooner. She could have taken personal action. She didn't have to outsource that. You know what I mean? So it's hard for me to get a read right now. Like, is this her faking everyone out? Like, is this a fake out by Moira X? Or is this just Hickman's attempt to say, hey, it's really hard to control how an entire life plays out. You can control certain elements, but you can't control everything. I mean, and this is one of the big things from, the novel, definitely, clearly a source of inspiration here, which is, the first 15 Lives of Harry August, which I recommend people read. It's great. It's the same or very similar premise as Moira's mutant ability, but not mutants. And one of the key tenets there in sort of what happens when you relive these lifelines, when your mutant ability is resurrection, is like, well, yeah, you relive it, you have all your knowledge, but you can't just change world events. You can't just change global events without tremendous reach and power and wealth, and you have to accumulate those things. Just because you know what's going to happen doesn't mean you can stop everything from happening. And that's been one of the interesting things about the Moira experiment is how do you actually play that out in story? I guess the question I have, and I don't think we've got a satisfactory answer yet, is what has Moira been controlling? She helps clearly in the build to Krakoa. In some way, this is part of the plan with Professor X and Magneto, the build to get a mutant nation to the point of Krakoa. Okay, she helped there. What's she doing after that? She's sitting and reading Destiny's diaries, planning for something. We don't know what. But she's not there's no hands-on anything that we've seen. So I'm really hoping in issue 3 and 4, we'll see some more of that. This was if the split is going to be first issue's Moira, second issue's Destiny and Mystique, third issue, Nimrod's coming crashing in, and then the fourth is everything burns, right? And there's going to be some sort of metamorphosis and change that leads to a new vision for 2022 in the X-Men line. Somewhere in there, I hope we fit in, and I fully expect to get the answer as to what is Moira's plan? What is she so scared of everyone finding out? I think if we didn't get that answer in Inferno, it would be infuriating. I would put the X-Men comics down for a minute. I fully expect to get that answer. The question is, will we also get more thorough backstory as to what Moira's actually been doing? I think it's crucial. I think it's been missing. I think the X-Men comics run that Hickman wrote was a great vehicle for that. It was not chosen to be a part of it. So what do we get to see now? Because it's all potential. It's pure potential, and it's a pure open slate, which is, it's thrilling, but only if we get it, only if we see it. Okay. Get in any good questions. If you got them, I will try to tackle what I can. I think as far as Inferno goes, I am very excited about the next couple of issues. I think it's going to be great. One thing I was not anticipating, I think, with this event is how thoroughly on the side of Mystique and Destiny I would be. To the point where I'm looking now and I'm okay, it seems like they're right. It seems like, clearly have to root for them. It's to the point where I'm what if they were right in Days of Future Past? In Uncanny X-Men 141 of 142, that's the first real big story for Mystique and Destinies. They come in with a reformed Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and they are trying to assassinate, at the time, Senator Robert Kelly. And the X-Men, in a Days of Future Past timeline, they send back Kate Pryde to prevent that, because they're that's where everything went wrong. But here's what I'm questioning, because Mystique and Destiny seem so right in this moment. I'm what if they were right in Days of Future Past, and actually Destiny, the precog, would have brought about a better timeline had they let Future Past carry out? That's how compelling and convincing their characters have been. Although I guess a lot of that, admittedly, is less about what they're saying they're going to do, because they're not necessarily saying much very specific, but it's more about Professor X and Magneto and I guess Moira at this point, and their cold pragmatism, and how morally bankrupt that can continue to feel. And and especially in the absence of the specifics of why, right? Like, I think potentially you can sell a lot of cold pragmatism if you have a why, right? That's kind of what Beast is doing. Like, those are the mental gymnastics Beast is playing right now, where he's saying, okay, I have to genocide Terra Verde in the interest of Krakoan pharmaceutical protections. I'm not saying that's a good answer. It's not, but at least we know why Beast is doing it. With Moira and Professor X and Magneto, we actually don't know why. And again, that's the answer that has to be here in order to understand, like, okay, but truly, truly why? Kid Destiny not come back? Why, when Destiny does come back, is Moira's first question, Magneto, can you squeeze the helmet on her head until she's dead? That's Moira's first question. Her reaction is hate and rage and murder. She cannot have Destiny here, which again, to me, is like, if that's really how you feel, why didn't you do something? Why didn't you do something? I'm a little baffled on that plot point, I gotta say. So, all right, what major Inferno questions do we have? If anything, get them in now. Again, there's super chat available if you want to get something prioritized. I think I covered like a lot of what I'm going to talk about in the Kraken Krakoa vid. I'm going to go deeper in the actual deep dive video on a couple things that I think you'll find interesting. The first is what's in the box, right? With Mystique giving to Emma, we're going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the Omega Sentinel in ways I did not expect to be. Gotta say, Karima Shapinder. Did not expect to be having a long conversation about that character. She clearly has a bigger role to play here with Nimrod and what's going on with Orcus. I found that very interesting. And then what else? I'm going to talk a bit about, the data pages, where we have Krakoa observing a conversation between Destiny and Mystique. I'm going to talk in a bit more detail there about what's going on and in some specifics with the data page language. I'll just say it here. If you notice, they always do the little, I don't know what you call it, between the codex here about where the data page is coming from. And the first data page in the Krakoa network reads Great Tree. The second one reads Great Machine, or MACHN. The implication to me that I got from that was this is a techno-organic Krakoa, right? Part tree, part machine, a hybrid of sorts. It could be a broader use. Jonathan Hickman is a writer who really likes to talk about machines. You have the Night Machine back in S.H.I.E.L.D. You have, Iron Man is the master of machines through the Illuminati. So it could be sort of a broader use, kind of referencing like the interconnectedness of things, this built network. But I definitely read that as part tree, part machine, kind of confirming, again, a thing that is teased and re-referenced in Inferno #1, which is like, oh yeah, Krakoa's been, I don't know if infected is the right word, but inhabited in part by Warlock and the techno-organic virus. And like, why would we have teased that in the first issue if we're not going to do anything with it? That's got to come back. It doesn't come back in any stronger way in the second issue, but I think that little tease there was our cue that like, okay, yeah, that's going to play a role. I think we're going to see a lot more from Krakoa, the island, the sentient island that we forget is sentient sometimes in the third and fourth issues. I mean, I think Nimrod, I don't know if Nimrod's specifically going to invade Krakoa, but clearly, the Krakoan for the next issue reads Nimrod, and there's going to be a showdown. I think we're going to get a lot more from Krakoa in terms of what is actually happening, what is the island actually thinking, and that could lead to a lot of turnover too for like what X-Men comics can look like after this event, right? Any changes that actually happen to the island. Okay, so there's a lot of cool stuff to come. I think it's a good event. It's not the banger that House and Powers was, but that expectation is not a good one. It's set up for failure, and it's good stuff. Like, it's enjoyable. It keeps the X-Men line. It keeps that center very clear. It keeps it clear like what the center of the universe should be, and that helps everything else. It even gives like an issue like Sword weight today. Like, Sword is not a direct tie-in, but the build to there being a mole within Sword, which has been happening for a while, and there being cracks in the fissure there, and Abigail Brand having secrets and plans of her own, like tonally, thematically, that plays with Inferno, right? It's not literal Inferno plot points, but all of that thinking, all of that plot fits in with what's going on in Inferno. So just having its presence in the middle of the line really, I think, kind of amplifies what's moving around it. I'm seeing in the comment here, more Cypher, please. Like, yes, absolutely. I mean, Cypher's clearly a major player in this event. I think needs a stronger presence, and I hopefully will get it because, you know, Cypher has again, like a moment in the first issue, and you don't do that unless you have something else for that character to be doing. At least I don't anticipate. All right, so let's talk Sword real quickly while we're here. So Sword number 9 played out today. Like I said, I was really delighted by this issue. We lost a lot of good Shi'ar Imperial Guard today. So pour one out for the Shi'ar Imperial Guard. You know, I was watching it and thinking kind of how much more traumatic it is when you have Imperial Guard getting taken out by the Lethal Legion, another classic Al Ewing continuity pull, which I love. Taken out by the Lethal Legion, but like next to mutants, right? And like mutants, it's like, oh, okay, they're down, they'll get resurrected. But then you see it happen like next to them with the Imperial Guard, and it's like, oh, they don't have that. They don't have the convenient, no death of resurrection. So pour one out for our friends in the Shi'ar Imperial Guard. That felt to me like a clear, hey, that Shi'ar Imperial Guard miniseries that we talked about, that's not happening. That's definitely not happening anymore. Al Ewing continues to play with Henry Peter Gyrick as the world's worst, but a very compelling villain, a very compelling diplomat, now the head of Alpha Flight. I appreciate that Alpha Flight is finally revealed in all of its base villainy that has been there from jump back in 1984. I have always said Alpha Flight are the worst and the worst of the villains, and all but confirmed here, both with Henry Peter Gyrick at the helm and with Jimmy James Hudson, aka Guardian, joining Orcus of his own free will. It would seem need a little more from Hudson here in terms of like why. He's totally swayed by, hey, they conquered Mars and that bothers him. Like, it could use a little more internal monologue on that one. But it makes, again, Alpha Flight is a good threat here. Gyrick at the head of it, especially because of the history that he as a character has with Abigail Brand. They do not get along, as should not be surprising. Abigail Brand's plotting in Sword continues to be really fascinating to me. Brand's playing a long game that Moira, Professor X, and Magneto are not. And maybe all of mutant kind is not, right? Brand's interests are different than what a lot of mutants and what a lot of Krakoa is thinking of, right? Like, I think Emma and Abigail are on similar wavelengths in terms of looking out for their own best interests and having their own plans and keeping wheels spinning. But Brand does that on a whole nother level. Again, Nick Fury of Space is not a super inaccurate idea, or at least like the platonic ideal of Nick Fury actually being good at his job. That's Abigail Brand in space. It's got interesting something that she's planning, which I find fascinating. She clearly was not accounting for Old Man Cable coming back and being a thorn in her side. I really like Al Ewing playing with that detail and saying, okay, we had young teen Cable, but what kind of difference does it make to now have this really wizened old vet who's going to see through a lot of Brand's BS? You know, she has to be more careful potentially. So that's a really interesting dynamic too. Like, I had almost forgotten that Old Man Cable was like a part of Sword still, but I love that he is. And then the big reveal at the end of Sword here, aside from the fact that Storm continues to be the coolest, is WizKid seemingly the mole reporting in to Henry Peter Gyrick. This feels like a red herring to me. I'd be surprised if WizKid isn't conning them or doing it at Brand's behest, honestly. I think it seems too easy otherwise. Like, and plus, like, Ewing and the Sword team, like, they've done a lot of work to make WizKid really cool and really fun in this era. And I think inverting that and making them, a saboteur working against mutant kind would undo a lot of that work, which doesn't mean it can't be done. But I kind of feel like it's red herring. I'm not buying necessarily good old WizKid as an actual saboteur. I feel like they're playing Henry Peter Gyrick. Because here's the thing. Like, like if Gyrick wins, like if Gyrick gets a one up on Sword in any meaningful capacity, like that's a disappointing story. Like the story is he thinks he's winning and he thinks he's got it, and then the rug gets pulled out from under him, and we make him look like a fool yet again. Like that's what I want to see here. Is it time tested and somewhat expected, of course, but like that's how this works. That's how that dynamic plays out. So I love Sword. I love everything that's going on here. I would definitely love to see Valeria Sheedy back on the book, but such is life. It's awesome. If you're not reading Sword, I highly recommend it. It is a great X-Men book. It is a good integrated companion piece to Al Ewing's work on Guardians of the Galaxy. You know, he continues to get to do really cool Marvel Cosmic stuff, and it's super fun as a result. It's not like a literal tie-in to what's going on in Inferno, but thematically and tonally, it is interconnected in ways that are really smart and really kind of add to the whole flavor of what's going on in the X-Men line in the Reign of X, which is kind of the best you can ask for. Speaking of the best you can ask for, Marauders number 25 was not that. I've been super down on Marauders since Kate's resurrection, I guess, was like the last compelling mystery. Duggan and team, like, they're just having fun. They're just having a good time. Like I said at the front, it's chewing gum comics. It is. I like some of these players. There's a really funny moment in this between Pyro and Kate Pride. This whole issue is, you know, basically they did a Star Wars fanfic issue last issue, and the whole team got thrown out of an airlock. And this is them trying to survive and get back at the bounty hunter who spited them. It happens. It is generally meaningless. It can be a fun time with these characters if you like these characters in this team. I am very excited about Steve Orlando taking over the book. It needs a creative infusion. It needs new life. I hope it can be given a direction that I'm excited about again, because the characters and the concept continue to be very fun, but the execution at this point is just like total chewing gum. Like I said, Wolverine number 17. You know, I'm kind of similarly. I'm more enthusiastic about Wolverine, definitely, than I am about Marauders. I think, again, like the Percy saga is going to be this huge omnibus of interconnected Wolverine and X-Force when all is said and done. We're moving past the Solemn arc. We're moving past Wolverine dealing with, you know, his Arakko arch nemesis, and we're now going back into CIA proceedings. Wolverine's got a contact in the CIA. He's interacting with Dolores of the X Desk, and there's all sorts of spy, political intrigue type stuff going on. Wolverine's barely in this comic, aside from like hanging out at karaoke night at the Green Lagoon, doing some stuff with Maverick. Again, if you're invested in the Percyverse, this will continue to work for you. If you haven't been, like, nothing has changed. It's not going to swing. I'm reading, and like I'm pretty middle of the road on the Percyverse. I got to say, like, his X-Force and his Wolverine, they always read fine to me. They're meat and potatoes comics, you know, like they're not doing stellar stuff. I don't love them, but I am interested, and I think they fit in what's going on in the universe. I've been saying this a bunch, but like, you know, Ben Percy with Joss Cassara, and I know there's other creators involved. They're going to be doing X Lives and X Deaths of Wolverine at the start of 2022. It's going to be this big event type thing in the spirit of House and Powers. And I'm really, really curious if they can pull it off. I'm really, really curious, because I don't, just from these runs, see it. I don't see that creative potential, but I hope it's there. Like, I want that to be good. I want that to be successful. You know, I think the hook for this book is a little off-putting, you know, because it's like, oh, okay, Wolverine doing a bunch of time travel. It's like, okay, like we had Lifeline travel right there. Are we not tapping it? Are we? It's unclear. Some of the covers are teasing Wolverine with like phalanxy, you know, techno-organic stuff going on. So if we're going to tap into that, okay, this gets a heck of a lot more interesting. Like it needs to be big and bold and weird, and not play it safe, and not do the same kind of Wolverine v Sabretooth, you know, saving Silver Fox romance type stuff that we've seen a billion times before in enjoyable Wolverine comics of the past. So I hope that it, again, like, setting, hey, we're going to do a House and Powers for Wolverine, setting that as an expectation, setting that as a baseline, no, it's not going to touch it. Don't expect that it will, but setting really, really fun, good Wolverine event, sure. Like, what are the latest examples of that specifically? You know, like Death of Wolverine was reasonably well done, but not excellent. I love Wolverine and the X-Men, the series, the Jason Aaron written run. That's a big hit for me. Remender's Uncanny X-Force is a great Wolverine book. Obviously, there's more characters involved. And then you go back to like Old Man Logan in the 2000s is obviously an event type thing. A big status, a very memorable book that a lot of people love. So, you know, if it can measure up to those types of books, I'll be happy. I'll be happy. If it can do something on the level of, hey, you like Old Man Logan? Check out this wild Wolverine time travel story. I will be happy. So hopefully we can get there. But obviously that's a 2022 thing that we'll figure out. All right. Does anyone have major questions before I go into what I expect Jonathan Hickman will be doing for Marvel after Inferno's done? And actually, before I get into that, you know, there is something I want to touch on in terms of like Emma's leadership, because it really seems like, okay, in Inferno, Magneto, Professor X, and Moira, they bring Emma in on the existence of Moira. So apparently she didn't know, which I'd been theorizing. Like, it seems like she knows. She didn't know. Or at least she plays like she didn't know. She's kind of mad at them. She's like, why are we hiding this? Which, yeah. Okay, so if we're setting the stage for Emma being a leader, or one of the key leaders of Krakoa, that's kind of been done. That's kind of the Utopia era, you know? Like, that is, like, it was Emma and Scott together in a relationship. Were very much the heads of the X-Men on the island nation of Utopia in the build through Avengers vs. X-Men when they get their diversified Phoenix powers. You know, like, that has been done with Emma as a major leader of an X-Men island nation, of an island nation. So to me, it's like, okay, if we're going to go that direction, cool. What are we doing differently? What are we doing differently that really sells like why Emma can be the leader this time, in a way that is different, in a way that is compelling? And I think there's a few hints maybe in this second issue about what that could be. The first of which just being like this mystery box that she's looking to secure. I feel like what's inside that box and what it means for Emma is going to really tell us how her leadership, how her presence among mutants can change this go around, you know? Because I think, not that things can't be repeated, like history is repeated all the time, that can be a point of a story even. Magneto is a very powerful person on this island nation, and obviously that he's done that before, right? It's kind of his thing. So it's not like those types of beats can't be repeated and have an effective story. I'm just really curious with Emma, especially in particular, like what can be different here that makes this more compelling. So, all right. So let's, here's a question. Would you want to see a Quiet Council series? I would have a while ago. I don't know that I do anymore. I definitely would have throughout the Dawn and the Reign. I think that would have been great. I think this sort of tapping into the Krakoan politics of it all is a big part of what I and many have enjoyed about the Hickman X-Men experience, you know? So I think that could have been a lot of fun. Now I'm less sold on it as things change. And again, too, like, I don't know that coming out of this, like, are we even going to have the same kind of Quiet Council, you know, post Inferno? I think the broad question is like, whatever Mutant Nation looks like after Inferno, there's going to be some sort of leadership and some sort of focus on those characters. I think a book that really centers on the planning, you know, kind of like a Bendis or Hickman Illuminati, or just something that focuses in on this version of the Quiet Council, like something that really focuses in on the influential political leaders of these communities. I actually do think would be a super value to this X-Men line, because, you know, the thing about Krakoa, or one of the big things about Krakoa that is so compelling, is like it's an active nation building. And I think one of the problems with with the Dawn and Through the Rain is the elements of nation building that we get or have gotten are fairly limited. You know, like there's a lot about Krakoan society that just absolutely has not been touched and has been taken for granted. So I think if you really looked at like an on the ground leadership, what are we doing, what are we planning kind of book, that actually feels like a real big gap. So having one moving forward, I think it makes sense. And I think too, like, you know, I could see I could see the negative reaction to this being like, you know, like it's just people sitting at a table talking, which is a lot of these scenes. But, you know, again, like you think about boardroom conversations and securing votes and the ways you can play up the tension and the drama of interpersonal relationships and power struggles in a political transaction. I mean, think of Game of Thrones. That's a huge element that makes Game of Thrones popular. The West Wing's obviously a popular series. Veep even, obviously, which is much funnier than anything in the X-Men line. And then, you know, something like Succession, like I mentioned, like there's all sorts of entertainment that could, yes, it could be 10, you know, big important people sitting around a table, but it's not that. And they find ways to up the stakes dramatically and emotionally. And a Quiet Council book could absolutely do that. You know, it doesn't literally need to be about Quiet Council meetings. It's about those characters and it's about the dynamics between them. That was part of what I liked about Marauders initially, was all the Hellfire sweet back and forth, which has been like completely dropped. Like what is Shinobi Shaw doing? Like when is the last time we saw Shinobi, right? Like Marauders has not touched that beat in several hot minutes. But okay, so good question. I think that would be interesting. I don't know that it's the right time for it anymore. Okay, so what else do we got? Could Emma see a potential for the precogs moving forward? Yeah, I mean, I think this was kind of my theory originally, was that Emma would join with Mystique and Destiny out of you know, a desire to move away from the Professor and Magneto's, you know, sort of ham-fisted pragmatic direction, because there could be value in seeing the future. So yeah, I think absolutely. I think that's, you know, Emma now knowing Moira's lifelines and knowing this information is available, she's not just going to sit on that and say, I'm not doing anything with it, right? And for Emma too, she hasn't been, I guess she'll have seen Moira's lifelines because she read her mind, but like she hasn't been indoctrinated in Moira's version of, and we have to kill Destiny because of it, you know? So like she might be the one to say, hey, Destiny, Moira, sit down in a room and let's talk. How can we use both of you to figure out what's best for mutant kind? And then, you know, actually find like a real long-term solution for the survival of mutant kind. She could be that player, sort of an intermediary, who brings both visions together, which I think could be interesting as well. So, all right. Why can't Destiny see the future? Good question. We don't know, obviously, right? Like, so that's the conversation between Mystique and Destiny. That Krakoa overhears is Destiny saying, when I look into the future, you know, I just see a big hole, basically. Now, I do wonder, I think this was a little, I kind of misread this. And I think it was kind of written in such a way, too, that can easily be misread. Like, the implication was like Destiny didn't have powers. Because the way she said it is like, if I look into the future, I don't see anything, which is like, okay, that's your whole power, right? Are all your precognitive abilities gone? But then when she's in the Quiet Council meeting, you know, Destiny has a great one-liner to you know, Chuck Daddy, which is, you know, do you want me to tell you how this vote's going to go, right? Which is her precog ability. So I'm now interpreting what she said to Mystique to actually be her saying, I can't see the end. I can't see the long, you know, end game of the future. There's just this hole. And if there's a hole there, that implies one of a few answers. I think one is Moira resets the lifeline, I want to say. So like there's a hole there because Moira either resets the lifeline or she doesn't, right? One of the two. And then, which isn't a good answer, I know. But then the other possibility for a hole there is Ascension, is the powers of 10, Phalanx, Homo Novissima, Ascension to a Dominion, which was talked about by Homo Novissima as this thing outside of Moira's lifelines. Very metaphysical, very difficult to conceptualize, but essentially it was like, we will live outside of your resurrected lifelines, if we ascend in this way to Dominion status, we will no longer be subject to the whims of Moira's lifelines. If that happens, if that is Moira's ultimate plan for herself or for mutant kind, maybe Destiny would not be able to see that because it was no longer part of the same sort of timeline. It was no longer part of the same sort of lifeline structure. That was where my head went, connecting back to those Powers of X those Powers of X comics. But like, we don't know for sure. But that's, that is the big question that they are trying to answer, which I think that is the same question. Why can't Destiny see into the future? That is the same question as what is Moira planning? And that answer is for sure going to come, I'm saying here, fingers crossed, over the next couple issues. Because if it doesn't, I'm going to riot. All right. So these are good questions. Thanks for bringing them in. The final thing I had on the docket here was, what's Hickman doing after X-Men? And we've talked about this a fair amount. I've had guesses out there. I may have even guessed this before. But so I've been reading a little more DC Black Label lately. I read Catwoman Lonely City, which is awesome. Go to your LCS and get a copy. Cliff Chang wrote, drew, colored, lettered, everything. Cliff's been the artist on Paper Girls, on the Wonder Woman run, New 52 with Brian Azzarello. And I had the chance to interview Cliff just this past week. It was great conversation. That'll be going up on the Comic Book Herald podcast. But in reading Catwoman Lonely City, I was reminded yet again, as I am every time I pick up a DC Black Label book, that like, one, it's fun to have stuff out of continuity that are just creators trying to do their best thing. I really enjoy the European album format. They're these big, oversized comics. They're they just feel weighty. They feel momentous in a way that your standard floppy does not. This is a gap for Marvel. This is a gap for Marvel Comics. And if there's one thing Marvel cannot stand, it is DC doing anything they are not doing and doing it well. It doesn't matter if Marvel's beating DC, which they always are in terms of sales. It matters that DC's doing it and they are not, then they want to chase it. I am surprised it has taken this long, but Marvel has not chased Black Label. Not really. To date, they have always been behind DC on the collected edition, kind of those evergreen type graphic novel selections, right? Because DC's had Vertigo and it has Watchmen and it's got the better selection. Marvel's that's never been their forte. They've never been as good at that. I think they want Hickman to launch Marvel Black Label. I'm jokingly calling this Marvel Black Monday Murders label. I'm sure it will have a better name than that. But I think that's what Hickman's going to launch. I think that's going to be his next big thing, is like, here's the thing. He can then write out of continuity Marvel graphic novels that are intended to be excellent and evergreen, which is kind of what House and Powers was. That's kind of what House and Powers was. It just happens to be part of an ongoing. And we could debate that, what would have been better, right? It's a debate. I'm still always going to ultimately prefer something tied to the ongoings, but I hear it. I hear it. He can write that. He can have books in that line. And then also he can curate it. Because that's the thing about the X-Men line, is like Hickman was playing, like I said a million times now, he was the player coach. He was bringing in writers that he thought was talented. He was coaching them. He was guiding them. He can play that role too, sort of that editorial side of things with the Black Label, where it's like this, okay, this is creators of vision doing a cool thing, doing their own cool thing, but all sort of curated and supported by a creator that has such tremendous goodwill and such a giant fan base. In Jonathan Hickman. So that is my new prediction for what Hickman's next big Marvel thing will be. It's going to be Marvel's Black Label. I feel really good about this one. And every time I mention this, everybody jumps in with like, okay, he's writing Doctor Strange, he's writing Inhumans, he's writing Eternals, all of which are like funny answers. I mean, Doctor Strange is the leader of that bunch for sure. It could be. Of course it could be, right? He could go on and he could just revamp another series. That to me, though, is like, I actually think that's a missed opportunity for Marvel and for Hickman if they do that. Like if he just relaunches Doctor Strange, right? That's just Marvel Comics as usual type stuff. And it might lead to really good comics. Cool. I'll read them. I'll be excited to see what happens. But that is not going to transform their business and adapt it to a shifting ecosystem of how comics are sold and consumed. And that to me would be not taking advantage of the market and of the creator you have, under contract here to do big things. He talked about like, it's not really my job at Marvel. It's not really in my contract to just write like an ongoing X-Men. Like that was the vibe I got from the interview he did when he announced he was done. Was basically like, it's not my gig at Marvel to just write like a regular X-Men series. Was kind of how he said it. If it's not that, then why would it be 20 issues of Doctor Strange? Why would that be any different? You know what I mean? Like, unless he's just going to go property by property, hoxpox everything, do 12 issues to relaunch a vision for each character. But at that point, it's like, well, why don't you just write good graphic novels and sell those as evergreen things too, instead of leading to the disappointment of you then bailing on it. I'm seeing somebody reference here, Chip Zdarsky's life story, kind of doing a similar thing. It is, yeah. I mean, I think Marvel's kind of got Chip on a track for doing like a what if line with Spider-Man life story, Spider Shadow, which has been pretty good, of like actual collected edition, good solid graphic novel type what ifs instead of just these weird crazy one-offs that what if has been historically. I think that was DC's thing for a few hot minutes, was like, hey, we're just going to give every creator we value their own imprint, right? So you had Black Label launch, everybody kind of got a book there that wanted one. Then you had Jeff Johns announce he's doing Killing whatever it was, which as far as I know is killed. It is dead in the water, which, like, okay. What were the other? I mean, they had DC Inc., they had DC Zoom, the Young Reader stuff, which is still happening, but it's called other stuff now. Point being, like, they had all these different imprints going. I think too much of that gets way too confusing. It becomes like an HBO Now, HBO Go, HBO regular situation where consumers are just like, what is what? Like, just what is good? But if Marvel, if they literally confined it to, and I think like maybe the Zdarsky wing of things, which is like, visions for what if books, you could just ladder that up into Marvel Black Monday Murders label. Like, it can just be a part of that line, because I think it's going to fit tonally with what is potentially happening there as well. So, all right, that's my pitch for what I think should happen, what I think Marvel and Hickman should do. Obviously, we will see whether or not that actually plays out. I'm seeing a couple final questions here. What about Hickman's Substack deal? Does he really have a future with Marvel? I mean, everything he's said is that, yeah, like he can do both. Is basically how he's talked about it. I mean, if at any like he has some sort of contract with Marvel. Who knows how binding, right? I don't think he's shackled into this. But he seems to enjoy it. It leads to a lot of press and easy press for him. I can see the upside. He gets to do fun stuff that gets a really wide audience. As a creator, he probably doesn't need it, but he also stepped away from Marvel, from 2016 to 2019. So like, he knows at this point, he's had the experience of being like, what is the advantage of being there? What is the advantage of not? And I think at this point, I would imagine he has the creative freedom where it's like, it's fun to be there. Maybe it's not, right? Like, when it's not, he'll leave, and then he'll do his 3 Moon 3 Worlds thing, which is off to a slow start, but it's interesting. He's experimenting and it's clearly having fun on his end, experimenting with what that can be. So yeah, it's an interesting question. I think, I'm seeing I'm seeing a note here about like, oh, like Black Label, it wouldn't work because they need like better art. Like, yeah, like you hire really good artists. Like Marvel does not have a talent networking problem. If they see work they like, they can write up the terms. They just have to decide to do it. And invest in it. And obviously, like the Black Label book, it's Black Label book, like DC Black Label is not like a lock that book's going to rule. There are plenty of those where I've been pretty checked out pretty quickly. But then there are some that are incredible. Like I said, I love Catwoman Lonely City. I love what's going on there. And then it's kind of a, it's a mixed bag of like, what even is Black Label, right? Because you have all the Tom King written minis, which vary in quality, but they all look amazing. Like it works for the best artists in the biz. So like, I have zero concerns there. Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing Laraz promo come up here in the chat. Like, yeah, get Hickman and Laraz back together, Pepe Laraz, for some out of continuity Doctor Strange thing. Like, yeah, like he's talked about doing stuff with Chris Pachalo. Like, do a Doctor Strange graphic novel. Cool, great, awesome. I'm checking it out. Like, who's not? And so I just think there's so much opportunity there. And yeah, like there's so many good artists at Marvel and elsewhere that I have no fear they could. And like, that's the thing with the Black Label type thing is like, you can give them more time for prestige format. It's printed on higher quality material. It's going to be fine. that part's not going to be the problem. I don't anticipate. Real quick, I'm seeing here thoughts on the return of X-Statix. Love X-Statix. Love X-Statix. If you are not familiar, go to your Marvel Unlimited account. If you don't have one, get one. Go to the early 2000s. Peter Milligan written, Mike Allred arted, and Laura Allred colored. X-Statix. It starts out as X-Force. I want to say it's X-Force, number 116, maybe? Early 2000s. And then here's the thing. I'm going to go X-Force 116 to 129, and then it rebrands as X-Statix. That's the guess off the top of my head. That could be way off, but you'll know when you see it. It's the Mike Allred art, and it is a great run. It is one of my favorite X books of all time, even though it is very much outside of the traditional X-Men continuity. I'm glad they're coming back. They did a one-shot not too long ago that I wasn't over the moon about. And it kind of just felt like a nostalgia fest, where it was like, okay, like we had this thing and it was great, but do we need any more of it? They're coming back with the Excellent in February 2022. The promo email made it sound like it was just a one shot. I don't know. I couldn't tell. Like I kind of hope it's more than that. But we'll see. We'll see. I hope it's more. I hope we at least get like 5 issues of Milligan and Allred doing an excellent thing. I mean, if it connects to like the Krakoa era in fun ways, that would be so thrilling. I would love that if they would play with parodying and satiring and really digging into the meat of what's going on in Krakoa. But Milligan and Allred are like, legendary. They can do whatever they want and will. So we will see. I'm seeing Dark Dupe pop up in the comments here. The promo image does include a dark counter to Dupe. Do not Google Dark Dupe. I've seen this. I've seen people make this mistake a handful of times. That is just my naming for good old Dupe. But yes, there is a Dark Dupe, so that will be exciting. Seriously, if you missed out on X-Statix, you missed out on some of the best Marvel comics of the early 2000s. They're absolutely some of my favorites. Not your traditional X-Men comics, so don't go in expecting that. The fact that it started out as X-Force is hilarious. Like, it doesn't make any sense, but it's very enjoyable. So, all right. Thanks everybody for listening. This has been a blast. As always, I really appreciate all of you joining live. And I'll be back next week with more X-Men talk. Kraken Krakoa 4 Inferno #2 coming as soon as I have time to record and upload. So thanks everybody for listening. You can find my stuff over at comicbookherald.com. You can find it at Comic Book Herald on Twitter or Facebook, Instagram, and you can go on over to patreon.com/comicbookherald if you're interested in supporting myself and the site. So thanks everybody for listening, and as always, enjoy the comics.